Hi everyone, and welcome to week 39 of 52 Reason and Record Tips. This week I wanted to start with the first of a series of mixing and mastering techniques that I'm going to show you. And this week I'm going to start with using compression in Reason and how you can achieve the best sounding final mix using proper compression techniques and avoid the so-called Reason sound that I've heard some naysayers mention. First of all, in order to use a compressor properly, you must first understand how it works and what it is used for. In the simplest of terms, a compressor is a device that reduces the dynamic range of an audio signal, which means that it narrows the difference between high and low audio levels or volumes. For example, let's say you have a snare drum track, where there are mostly soft hits, but every once in a while a snare hit just jumps up in level. Rather than manually ride the volume fader on that track, adding a compressor to the snare will keep the levels that jump out in check and reduce the output volume by a certain amount that you determine. We'll get to more on that in a second. And also allow you to raise the overall level of that snare track so that the soft parts still stand out in the mix. Compressors can also be used to color or change the way an audio signal sounds by severely limiting any dynamics. A heavily compressed guitar track is a good example of this. You can use compressors on individual instruments or tracks, and also on the entire mix of the song. But be aware that overuse of compression will drastically affect the way the song sounds, which for some genres of music is actually what they are trying to achieve. Here is an example of a little idea that I have with 3 tracks, a drum, a synth pad, and a bass sound. Without any compression or EQ applied, you can hear that things sound a little bit flat. If I just select the default mastering suite combinator on the main mixer and tweak a few knobs at random, well, we can right away start to hear that so-called Reason sound that I've heard some naysayers complain about. But why are we hearing it? Well, let's have a look at what's going on with the compressor in this patch. There are a few parameters that seriously affect how the compressor is going to do its job. The input gain is one. That is where you decide the volume that is being fed to the compressor. The threshold is another. This parameter tells the compressor when to start working. So if the threshold is set to a low value, it will always be compressing any incoming signal. Whenever the audio signal goes above that threshold, compression is applied. The ratio setting is how the compressor will treat audio that rises above the threshold. It works like this. Let's say you had some audio which was 8 dB over the threshold, and you had a ratio of 4:1. Then the compressor will reduce it to an output of 2 dB over the threshold. Every 4 dB over the threshold was reduced to 1 dB. So higher ratios with lower thresholds will produce a very noticeable difference in sound. Lower ratios with higher thresholds will make the compressed sound much less obvious. Soft knee slowly increases the compression ratio as the level increases and eventually reaches the compression ratio set by the user. A soft knee reduces the audible change from uncompressed to compressed, especially for higher ratios where the changeover is more noticeable. With this turned off, you will also achieve a hard knee, which is a much more drastic change. The attack and release settings will change the transients of the compressed signal. Slow attack times, or turning the knob to the right, will result in a much more punchy sound, while short attack times will result in a more washed out sound and softer sound. Release determines how long it will take the compressed signal to return to normal. So a slow release time, which is the knob turned to the right again, will result in a smoother transition, where a short release time, knob turned to the left, will be a much faster change. There is a sound that I've actually been hearing a lot in music today, which leads me to believe that a lot of people do not know how to use compressors, and it's referred to a lot by audio engineers as breathing and pumping. As you can hear on this track, when I increase the compression ratio and lower the threshold, it sounds like all the highs go away when the bass drum and the snare drum or the bass sound kick in. That's because those sounds are quite loud in the mix with overlapping frequencies, and when they hit, they force the compressor to do its job. And without knowledge of how a compressor works, well, you can hear the results. That being said, there are more than a few genres of music I've heard where this seems to be the sound of that genre, but I'm not really sure if it's intentional or not. But since we are trying to get the best sounding mix possible, there are a few things we can do to keep the mix punchy and loud and avoid the breathing and pumping sound. First of all, and this is really important, never ever start your mix with any mastering or compression applied to the entire mix. Because as you start to solo or mute tracks while you're working on them, the compressor will behave differently, and you will end up adjusting levels on tracks that may not need to be adjusted. I suggest working with EQ, the M-Class EQ for Reason, and if you're on record, the SSL channel EQs as well, to get each track sounding the way that you want. And remember, cutting frequencies instead of boosting is always the first choice. If sound needs a bit more highs and presence, cut some lows and low mids, and raise the volume of the track. I also make it a habit to treat sounds like colors. That is, if I want a particular sound to stand out in the mix, I will remove frequencies that are dominant in that sound from the other tracks by using the low-pass and high-pass EQs in the M-Class, and or the high-pass filter and low-pass filters that are in record. Watch the levels that are being fed to each channel of the mixer so that you are not clipping, and try to always keep the master fader at a maximum of unity gain, which is about 100 on the Reason 14x2 mixer, and which is also 0 dB on the Record master fader. Too often I see people with all the mixer channels pinned to the top and the master fader also pinned to the top. It's just not a good idea, unless of course you like digital distortion. If the mix is too low to hear, turn up your monitors or headphones almost to max, and then mix. Now for a quick little discussion about compression and the different types. The compressor that we have loaded into this mastering suite is a stereo compressor, which means that it is affecting the entire mix. So if we want the song to have a lot of bass, but also have mids and highs that stand out, it's the wrong tool for the job. What we need is a multiband compressor. That is, a compressor which splits the incoming signal into separate frequencies or bands, applies compression to each frequency or band individually, and then mixes them all back together. The Reason Factory Sound Bank has quite a few options for multiband compressor presets, and they're in the M-Class Mastering Patches folder. But be aware, these are just templates. You do need to do some tweaking to make them work for your song. You're most likely going to need to adjust the settings of each of the band's compressors to get the best results. And now we can hear the result of a mix done with the aid of multiband compression on the master, as well as some dual band compression on the drums, and a bit of EQ applied to the tracks. A/B that to the other mix, which was just a wall of sound that was breathing and pumping, and you can hear the difference that a little bit of knowledge about compression makes. I hope that this week's video helped you understand a bit more about compression and how and when to use it, and that your resultant mixes sound a whole lot better. Well, that's it for another week. Again, I'm James Bernard from Propellerhead Software, and I will see you all next week with yet another tip.